When my family immigrated to Canada at the end of first grade, the "nice to meet you" and "where's the toilets" I had learned in my once-a-week English class in China only got me through meeting the teacher and bathroom trips. My mom wrote index cards for me with English phrases on them and instructed me to flash them to communicate. They were painstakingly neat, with English on one side and Chinese on the other, written in her meticulous teacher's handwriting, all with survival and friend-making in mind. Within 5 minutes of the first bell on day 1, the head class bully, Monique, taught me to say "shut up" and "you're stupid." Under her guidance, I proudly showed what I had learned to the teacher. My mom was called to the office that afternoon. I hid the index cards deep in my backpack that whole first month and never showed them to anyone. I stopped trusting my classmates to teach me English. Instead, I watched television with Rita, our landlord. At 86 or 88, dear, you must never reveal your true age if you are a lady. Rita belonged firmly to the videocassette generation. Her coat closet and her dressers were full to the brim with black Maxwell videotapes and white labels, and what must have amounted to years spent in her television room watching, recording, rewatching movies. To 7-year-old me, these tapes represented an admirable feat of human perseverance. Rita's days were unremarkable. She had very few friends and spoke to them even fewer times on the phone. She rarely went out. Her husband died years ago, and her only son visits once every month or 2 or 3. Now I see that these tapes were her loneliness, filling up a space that I wished to join. Almost every day after school or dinner, I went upstairs to Rita's living room and watched her cook, play card games or dominoes with her gnarly, shaking hands, and watch movies, endless movies together. Of the year and a half I spent in her company, she rarely recorded any new titles. She already had all the ones she wanted. On some special nights, Rita let me choose what we watched. On most days, she wanted to revisit an old favorite, telling me about the pretty dresses and well-mannered men, or important moral messages she felt I needed to know. The tapes were worn out, the writing barely visible, and at times the movie skipped or blurred, but we always sat through the empty moments with patience when the television forced its way forward through the snowing screen, and Rita reminded herself to re-record it next time, which she never did. In the first few months, I could barely understand Rita, let alone the slightly affected transatlantic accents of movie stars in the 30s and 50s, Rita's periods of choice. So I watched their faces, admired their dancing and singing instead. I watched Rita as well. She demonstrated her mood through varying degrees of stubbornness. She was stern, but never mean. When she felt generous, she would ask me about school. If she felt benevolent, she would lecture me about life and teach me about old Hollywood, of which she had an encyclopedic knowledge. If she felt wronged or judged, like the time she thought my mother had stolen something from her, she frowned, even more than usual, and spoke tersely, then fell into silence. Days after each misunderstanding, she offered a begrudging reconciliation when my mother or I apologized, because she rarely did. Even when she was happy, Rita never felt obligated to talk, and neither did I. At first I couldn't say much, and she would mime words and attempt to teach me how to say things like music, singing, games, words of an idyllic youth that she then tried to deliver. At first, we watched movies in silence, with Rita laughing occasionally and trying to explain things, before giving up at my confusion and waving at me to keep watching. Her taste was at once eclectic and highly particular. She loved drama, whether it was in black and white or musicals, historical biographies, or operas. I learned about wars and romance, and during Passover, she sat my mother and me down for a 3-hour viewing of Cecil DeMille's 10 Commandments film, complete with matzos, to introduce us to Judaism. Because of Rita's extensive library of recordings, I soon became familiar with her favorites, the sweethearts of her youth: Fred and Ginger, Jean and Frank, Audrey and Catherine, and eventually Shirley Temple. I was confused with her curls more than anything. Up to this point, all the heroines had hair that could be imaginable as an alteration of my straight black hair. How were her ringlets so tightly wound? Did she bind them around those Halloween Tootsie Rolls or miniature curlers every night before bed? Rita had thin, wispy white hair that curled into a cloud around her head or lay damp close to her eyes after a shower. I could not imagine a younger Rita with golden corkscrews of hair, which, at the time, translated into the curls impossibility. Eventually, I learned that people in the English-speaking world categorized each other by hair color: brunette, redhead, strawberry/dirty/dark blonde. There was no reference for straight black hair. It was an anomaly to colloquial English. As one of 2 East Asians and a handful of non-black ethnic minority students in my entire school, I remained an anomaly, even after learning English. I envied Shirley Temple for her acceptability. I wanted her bright eyes and curly top. I started singing her songs and dancing in the mall at Christmas to the sound of music while reimagining myself as a pretty young white nun frolicking in the mountains. All of this amused Rita. We never spoke directly about race or culture, nor do I think I was ready to conceptualize it in the 2nd grade. She did little to help me realize my Chinese identity, but she was generous with my culture, and I embraced hers. She was a Jewish white lady in the suburbs who watched Madame Butterfly with me and explained how awful reality was for Japanese women during the war in between tears. I taught her about Chinese New Year, and I told her the matzos were delicious, even when they were not, and she said they were not. When she noted a lead actress's beauty, it was always intrinsically linked to a talented voice, a well-acted scene, a flawless dance number, never focusing strictly on her physical appearance. She cooked the first full chicken I ever had. We picked peaches in her backyard in the summer. I shoveled the snow in her driveway in the winter, and she pushed $5 into my hand. After we left Toronto, she wrote us letters and sent money for my birthday for a few years, with her handwriting showing more violent shaking each time. My new town's population was 70% Asian, and I started looking up to Chinese celebrities I had forgotten about while watching movies with Rita. She called, we called, and then fewer times. Then both sides stopped. Our lives were separate now. I stopped watching old films altogether. Shirley Temple died last spring. Nobody seemed to have noticed. She died 4 days before Valentine's Day without ceremony. A quiet, foreseen death after a long, full life. I am certain that Rita is now dead. She had confessed her true age only once while cooking dinner and warning me not to tell anyone with a wink. In old age, every year is lengthier. She was much, much older than she let on. Unlike me, few of her generation can mourn Shirley Temple. Long after I have forgotten Rita's last name, the smell of her carpet, the picture frames on her walls, my own black hair, I think of her now. How easy it was to dismiss her, to relegate her to the past. It is simple and surprising, this pain of missing her. On a snowy day, when Shirley Temple dies, when hurrying in the streets and seeing an old lady of indeterminate age walking into a house alone.